There's something sacred about your first home. For most people, it's not just a collection of bricks and wood. It's the setting for your future. It's where your memories are supposed to begin. That's what this house meant to us. It wasn't the biggest house on the street or the flashiest, but it had something rare, soul. The first time my wife and I pulled into the driveway, I remember how her eyes lit up. "This is it," she said. "It feels like us." And she was right. The porch creaked when you stepped on it. The yard needed a little love, and the paint was outdated, but to us, it was perfect. We imagined our life unfolding there. Late-night movie marathons, Sunday breakfasts, spontaneous slow dances in the kitchen. I promised her we'd grow old in that house, with her garden overflowing in the backyard and our porch swaying in the evening breeze. My wife, Anna, had this rare gift of turning the ordinary into magic. She could see potential in anything, and she saw it in that house, every corner, every room, every window, especially the color. She always said, "One day, we'll paint it seafoam green, like the ocean after a storm settles. That color calms the heart." We talked about it often. In fact, I remember one specific moment. It was our second anniversary. We were sitting on the porch with warm mugs in hand, a blanket wrapped around us as autumn leaves danced across the lawn. She rested her head on my shoulder and whispered, "When we paint it green, promise me we'll sit here and watch the world slow down." I smiled and said, "Only if you promise to make pancakes every Sunday in return." She laughed, kissed my cheek, and said, "Deal." But fate had other plans. Not long after that night, Anna started feeling unusually tired. Headaches, dizziness. At first, we brushed it off. Work stress, we thought. Maybe low iron. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. We went through tests, appointments, scans, until finally we got the diagnosis. Cancer. Aggressive. Rare. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, medications, and heartbreaking conversations. Through it all, she never stopped smiling, never stopped planning. She talked about our future even as the doctors stopped giving us one. One evening, as I sat beside her hospital bed, she turned to me and said, "If something happens, promise me you'll paint the house." Her voice was weak, but her eyes were steady. "Make it green for me. Promise you won't let this place become a monument to sadness." I promised. And then one night, she was gone. Peacefully, quietly. Just like that, half my world disappeared. After the funeral, I couldn't even walk into the kitchen without breaking down. Her laugh echoed in the halls. Her garden, once so full of life, wilted just like I did. I stopped opening the blinds. The silence became unbearable. Friends reached out, but I ignored most calls. I wasn't ready. I wasn't anything. I was just broken. Months passed. The seasons changed, but I didn't. Until one day, as winter melted into spring, I stood outside and looked at the house. The white paint was faded and chipped, the siding stained from years of rain. It looked tired. Like me. That's when I remembered her words. So I did it. I went to the hardware store and asked for the exact shade we had talked about. Seafoam green. The guy behind the counter raised an eyebrow. "Not many people go for this color," he said. "It's unique." I smiled through the ache in my chest and replied, "She was unique." The first day, I held the brush in my hand. I hesitated. Painting over the old color felt like letting go. But then I remembered her smile, the way her face lit up when she described the ocean, and I dipped the brush into the bucket. Stroke by stroke, I brought her vision to life. The green spread across the house like healing. Neighbors walked by and nodded approvingly. Some stopped to chat, saying it looked peaceful or elegant. But they had no idea what it really meant to me. They didn't know I was painting my grief, layering my loss with love. By the time I finished, the house looked completely reborn. It wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It was calm, serene, like standing barefoot in wet sand, watching the tide roll in. I remember standing across the street that evening, Scout, my dog, sitting beside me, both of us watching as the last light of day kissed the green walls. And in that moment, for the first time in nearly a year, I didn't cry. I just breathed. But I should have known peace never lasts long, at least not in an HOA control neighborhood. The green hadn't even dried completely when the real trouble began. A storm was coming. And this time, it wasn't cancer. It was beige. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Not in a loud, dramatic way. Not with thunder or broken windows or sirens. Just a quiet, ordinary Tuesday. The kind where birds chirp and your dog barks at the mailman and the coffee tastes just a little better than usual. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping through old photo albums, something I rarely allowed myself to do, when I heard the distinct thump of the mailbox closing. Scout barked twice, then went back to chewing his rope toy. I remember walking out barefoot, the porch still slick with morning dew. And there it was, the letter, plain white envelope, perfectly square, with the telltale red stamp of the Homeowners Association in the upper corner. That red ink might as well have said, "We're here to ruin your peace." It was the fifth letter I'd received from them in the past 2 years. The previous ones were about trash bins being visible past 8 a.m., a wind chime that was audibly excessive, and once unbelievably because Scout's bark was too aggressive for the tone of the neighborhood. I'm not kidding. These people would probably find the sky if the clouds weren't beige enough. I rolled my eyes and tore it open without thinking. At most, I figure it would be another warning about my garden, which had grown a bit wild in her absence. But this time it was different. The language was colder, less neighborly, more authoritarian, like it had been written by someone who never smiled. It read, "Dear Mr. Harris, this is an official notice of noncompliance. Your current house color, specifically the shade of green painted on your exterior, does not align with the architectural aesthetic requirements outlined in HOA Regulation 14C, subsection 3.7. To maintain community cohesion and uniformity, your home must be repainted in one of the following approved neutral tones. Beige vierkant trait désert mist. Taupe number 2, soft clay. Dusty sand number 1, muted shell. You are required to comply within 30 calendar days of this notice. Failure to do so will result in escalating fines beginning at $150 per day, legal action, and potential liens placed on your property. Thank you for your attention to this matter. HOA Compliance Enforcement Committee." I sat down on the porch steps, letter trembling in my hands. For a long moment, I didn't move. My heart wasn't racing. It was slow, heavy, as if trying to drag me back into the hole I had only recently crawled out of. Seafoam green, the color she loved, the color that finally made this house feel like a home again, the color that made my grief breathable, and now was being outlawed, banned, written off as non-compliant. The anger didn't hit right away. At first, I just felt hollow, confused, like I was being told the sky was too blue. But then I looked up at the house, the way the morning light made the green glow like dew, and something inside me snapped. Not rage, exactly. Not sadness either. Just a pure, unfiltered no. No, I wasn't going to let them do this to me. Not again. I had already lost her. I had already spent a year learning how to live in her absence. Now, they wanted to take the one thing that brought her memory to life. I walked inside and placed the letter on the kitchen counter. Then I brewed a second cup of coffee and sat at the table, staring at the wall across from me. It still had the painting she made in her art class, a watercolor of crashing waves. She'd laughed when she gave it to me. "It's awful," she said, "but it's us. That painting, that house color, this home, they were all her." And suddenly, the HOA wasn't just a committee. It was the villain in our story. I went back outside and stared at the houses on our street. One by one, each looked like a clone copy of the next. Same boxy design, same dull color palette, same personality vacuum. It was like living inside a real estate brochure no one ever updated. Beige, beige, and more beige. The same color as disappointment, as erasure. And they wanted me to match that. They wanted me to wipe away everything that made my home mine. Made it hers. They called it visual harmony. I called it soul-deep theft. That night, I dug through my garage and pulled out the original HOA handbook from when we bought the home. I flipped through the fine print, hunting for any mention of restrictions against green. Nothing. They only listed approved color families, and even that was vaguely worded. It was all interpretation, all subjective. They could twist it however they pleased. And in this case, they had. I was already in their crosshairs, and I knew who was pulling the trigger. Linda Kepler, the self-appointed queen of Beige. She'd been HOA president for nearly a decade and ruled the neighborhood like it was her personal fiefdom. She once fined a neighbor $75 for having an inflatable Halloween ghost that flapped inappropriately in high winds. Another guy got a letter for parking his red truck in his own driveway because it was visually disruptive. She was known for walking around with a clipboard and a digital level. She was the law, and the law always wore taupe. So I made a decision. I would fight, not with fists. She didn't even pretend to smile. Instead, she opened her mouth with a voice so crisp it could slice bread. "Mr. Harris," she began, pausing dramatically as if I might deny my identity. "Good morning, Linda," I replied calmly, already bracing myself. She didn't respond to my greeting. Instead, she pulled a printed photo from her clipboard and held it up like evidence in a courtroom. It was my house, shot from an angle that somehow made it look like a scene of urban graffiti instead of the calm, seafoam-painted home I had poured my heart into. "You've received the compliance notice, I assume?" "I have," I said, setting my coffee down. "Beautiful morning, by the way." She ignored that too. "Your house, Mr. Harris, is not in alignment with the HOA's color regulations. We've already received 3 anonymous complaints." "Anonymous, huh?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "I wonder who those could have been." She pursed her lips so tight I thought they might disappear. "We have standards in this community," she snapped. "We take visual consistency very seriously. Your house stands out. It disrupts the cohesion of the street." I let that sit in the air for a moment. "Cohesion," I repeated. "You mean it has color? It has personality. It looks alive." She blinked at me, as if stunned by my choice of words. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice now sharp. "This isn't personal. It's policy." Oh, but it was personal, and we both knew it. This was the same woman who fined a couple for having a bird feeder because it attracted unregulated avian species. The same woman who held a grudge against a single dad for installing a swing set without prior approval. She didn't just enforce rules. She hunted violations like they were sport. I stood up slowly, letting Scout stretch beside me, and looked her square in the eyes. "You know," I said, "when my wife and I bought this house, we dreamed of making it a home. This color," I gestured toward the green walls, "was her dream. It's not just paint, Linda. It's memory. It's healing. It's mine." She didn't flinch. Her gaze was steady, hard, and unfeeling. "And now it's a violation," she said flatly. She handed me a printed copy of the bylaw, highlighted in yellow, and a formal demand to comply. As she turned to leave, she added one final blow. "Rules are rules, Mr. Harris. Personal meaning doesn't exempt you from community standards. You have 28 days left." Scout let out a soft growl. I couldn't blame him. As I watched her disappear down the sidewalk, clipboard bouncing at her side like a weapon holstered in authority, I felt something shift inside me. Not sadness this time. Not helplessness. Resolve. I went inside, placed the letter on the table, and poured myself another cup of coffee. I sat in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing past the windows. Then I picked up a pen and wrote 3 words on a napkin. Make it count. They wanted beige? Fine. I'd give them beige. But I would also give them something else. Something they couldn't anticipate. Something they couldn't control. I was going to turn my house into a message. A protest. A tribute. And they were going to become part of it, whether they liked it or not. The moment Linda walked off my property, the sun seemed dimmer. Not because of her, but because I knew the battle ahead wouldn't be easy, and certainly wouldn't be quick. HOA battles never are. They don't fire bullets. They drown you in paper, policies, and fines until you submit. I stood on my porch, staring at the green walls of my house, feeling the weight of the demand pressing in from all sides. Seafoam green, the last thing my wife ever asked me to do, now declared non-compliant by people who never knew her name. People who wouldn't lose sleep painting over a memory if it meant matching Linda Kepler's beige fantasy. I wasn't angry yet. I was disappointed, tired, and more than anything, motivated. And then, as I sat in silence with that thought, a strange calm washed over me, followed by a jolt of inspiration so clear I physically stood up. I would paint the house beige. But not just beige. I would turn this house into a canvas. A story. A rebellion. And the characters? The very people who try to silence it. I remember whispering the idea out loud, almost like testing it. What if I painted them on the wall? At first, it sounded ridiculous, even childish. But then it began to evolve. My house, painted in the boring, soul-crushing shade they demanded. But over it, a bold, vibrant mural that mocked their control, that exposed their obsession with power, that reminded the world that homes are not prisons, that grief isn't beige, that we are allowed to be human, expressive, messy, and alive. I spent the next several hours pacing through the house, thinking through every detail. Where would the mural go? What style? Will I get in trouble? Did the HOA allow murals? Could they ban them retroactively? Could they sue me? I wasn't a lawyer, but I was stubborn. I spent the entire next day buried in documents. I dug up the HOA's master guidelines, which I still had filed away from when Anna and I first moved in. I read through every clause, every subsection. Nothing said murals were banned. Not a word. There were paint color guidelines, front yard regulations, garage usage policies, noise ordinances, pet leash lengths, but no rule that said I couldn't decorate the side of my house with artwork, especially if the base color was HOA approved. I even checked municipal codes just to be safe. As long as it wasn't offensive, vulgar, or commercial advertising, I was in the clear. And I wasn't planning to draw anything obscene, just a little satire. The next morning, I called my old friend Eric. He was a local photographer and art collector who knew almost every muralist in the county. I told him my plan. At first, he laughed. Hard. Then, when he realized I was serious, he said, "You know what? I think I have the perfect guy." That's how I met Rico. Rico Morales was a 29-year-old street artist with a reputation for sharp, thought-provoking public art. He had this rare ability to blend realism with satire, like Banksy, but with more color and less anonymity. His work had been featured on coffee shop walls, abandoned factories, and even in a courthouse lobby in a nearby city. He agreed to meet me for lunch at a food truck lot downtown. Rico showed up with paint-splattered boots, a sketchbook, and a mischievous smile. I liked him immediately. "So," he said between bites of a grilled cheese stuffed with jalapenos, "you're telling me you want to turn your HOA into a mural?" "Not just a mural," I replied. "A statement. A peaceful protest. They want me to erase my wife's memory. I want to show them what happens when you try to erase someone's story." He leaned back, eyebrows raised. "You're kind of badass, you know that?" I chuckled. "Not really. I'm just tired of watching people bully others behind the safety of a bylaw." He nodded slowly, flipping open his sketchbook. "All right, let's talk vision." Over the next hour, we brainstormed. I described the main characters. Linda the enforcer, Carl the vice president who silently backed everything, and Deborah the trees, who saw residents less like people and more like ATM machines. I wanted them on the side of the house that faced the main entrance to the neighborhood. The biggest wall, the most visible. "I'll paint the house beige first," I said. "Exactly the shade they want. Blah, blah, blah. That way, I'm technically in full compliance." Rico grinned. And then we turned it into a canvas of poetic justice. We shook hands before parting ways. I felt light for the first time in weeks, excited, even like I was finally writing a chapter in this story that I controlled. I stopped by the hardware store that same evening, picked up 4 gallons of HOA Beige number 3, and began rolling it on the walls the next day. It felt strange, painting over the seafoam green. My hand trembled at times. I whispered apologies to my wife with every stroke. But I reminded myself, this wasn't an end. This was a transformation. I was about to create something she would have absolutely loved. By the end of the weekend, the house was a blank beige canvas. But in my mind, it was already a mural. They say the pen is mightier than the sword. But in this neighborhood, the mightiest weapon was the HOA handbook, that thick, joy-killing, comma-riddled document with more fine print than a credit card contract. Before a single drop of paint hit my wall, I knew I had to cover every legal base, because Linda Kepler would come at me with all the fury of a suburban tyrant whose kingdom had been disrespected. And she would come. That much was certain. So, I began with what felt like the HOA equivalent of spy work. I spent hours sitting at my kitchen table, pages spread out like an evidence wall from a true crime show. Scout, loyal as always, sat beside me while I read clause after clause, looking for any language about decorative murals, paint-based art, or modifications to HOA-approved colors. It was exhausting. She listened carefully, then scanned the documents, flipping back and forth with a focused look. Then she leaned back in her chair and smiled. "Well," she said, "they definitely want you to think they can control everything. But they can't. Based on this, you're legally compliant if you use an approved base color, which you are, and murals aren't banned." I blinked. "So, I can paint anything I want, as long as the background is beige number 3? "Basically, yeah," she said. "They could try to challenge it, but without any bylaws banning murals specifically, they'd have a hard time enforcing anything. As long as it's not obscene or a violation of broader city codes, you're protected." That was all I needed to hear. I bought Rico lunch the next day to celebrate. We met at a tiny taco joint behind a laundromat where he pulled out his sketchbook like it was a sacred relic. And what I saw, pure brilliance. He had drawn Linda first, front and center. A caricature, yes, but somehow still unmistakably her. Towering in size, wearing her signature visor and a clipboard in one hand like a royal decree. But instead of her being regal, Rico had rendered her as a cartoon tyrant sitting atop a literal throne of violation slips. Her eyes squinted in judgment, a measuring tape draped like royal jewelry, and a tiny HOA flag perched atop her head like a crown. Beside her stood Carl, the HOA vice president, portrayed as a sneaky little man holding up a grass-measuring laser like it was a weapon. His khaki shorts were exaggerated, his expression permanently suspicious. On the other side of the mural, Rico had drawn Deborah, the treasurer, smiling maniacally while swimming through piles of HOA dues and paperwork like a greedy dragon. But the best part? Each character was surrounded by exaggerated neighborhood violations. Bird feeders marked as contraband, a garden gnome being handcuffed, and a child's chalk drawing on a sidewalk with yellow caution tape around it. The entire mural was hilarious and painfully accurate. I laughed so hard I cried. "This is perfect," I told him. "This is everything I didn't know I needed." Rico grinned, then turned to the blank page beside the sketches. "Here's the wall breakdown," he said. "We'll prime over the beige base coat with sealant. Then I'll sketch in stages. I'll do outlines first, fill in backgrounds, then detail. You'll need to help with some of the block coloring if you want to save time. I'll paint all night if I have to," I said. "Let's make it happen." We picked a Saturday night to begin, late enough that most neighbors would be inside and Linda wouldn't be on patrol. Rico brought his supplies in the trunk of a beat-up sedan. Cans of primer, brushes, stencils, and a few industrial-sized cans of spray paint. We set up spotlights on the side wall of the house, the biggest, flattest surface that faced the main road into the community. As we worked, I felt something shift. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. This mural, this movement, it was about voice. Taking back control from a system that tried to flatten out everyone's uniqueness. I thought of the neighbors Linda had silenced over the years. The people who just wanted a wind chime or a colorful front door or a swing set for their kids. The way she shut them down using rules no one voted for. The mural was for them, too. The first night, we painted until 3 a.m. Rico did outlines while I filled in base blocks of color. We played music softly from a Bluetooth speaker, and Scout lay nearby in a paint-splattered blanket like our sleepy mascot. It was the most alive I had felt since Anna passed. I even caught myself laughing, not the polite kind, but the belly-deep kind that comes when something feels right in your bones. Over the next week, the wall slowly came to life. Neighbors began to notice. They didn't say much at first, just lingered a little longer on their morning walks. Then came the comments. "Is that Linda on a throne? Wait, is that Deborah counting money in a hot tub? Oh my God, is that Carl measuring someone's grass with calipers?" Word started to spread like wildfire. Some people were horrified, mostly Linda's loyalists, the same folks who still iron their American flags and water their rocks. But most, they loved it. They felt it. For the first time in years, something was bringing people together. Not through compliance, but through color, through laughter, through art. And the best part? I hadn't broken a single rule. That'd be why the time the mural was complete, it didn't feel like a wall anymore. It felt like a living, breathing story, etched in paint, sarcasm, and rebellion. It took us exactly 12 nights to finish. We painted under the cover of darkness at first, blending outlines with base layers, then adding details. Rico's touch was flawless. He'd turn a single smirk or raised eyebrow into a full story. But as word spread, more neighbors started stopping by to watch, offer snacks, and, eventually, to help. On night 5, Mr. Jenkins from across the street brought us sandwiches. On night 7, Clara, a high school art student, came over with her own paint brushes and added some incredible shading to Carl's violation laser. By night 9, it was a full-blown block event. People brought lawn chairs and coolers. Someone even set up a little speaker and started playing light jazz while we painted. You could feel it in the air, this collective release. Like the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath under Linda's rule, and now it was finally exhaling. The mural itself was glorious. At the center, Queen Linda Kepler, perched on her towering throne of HOA violation slips, wearing a crown made from many notice of noncompliance forms. Behind her, storm clouds brewed, but in cartoon form. On one side, Carl peeked over a bush with binoculars, spying on someone's too colorful garden gnome. On the other, Deborah the treasurer sat in a literal hot tub filled with neighborhood dues, sunglasses on, smug expression intact. And beneath them, small, detailed vignettes of actual HOA complaints from the past. A bird feeder encircled in yellow caution tape. A Halloween skeleton being escorted into a police car. A pair of flip-flops on a porch labeled suspicious clutter. Every square inch of the mural told a story. It was satire. It was brilliant. It was undeniable. And it all sat against the base of perfectly compliant HOA Beige number 3. I remember the moment we peeled off the last bit of painter's tape. It was just after 5:30 p.m. on Saturday. Rico stood back, hands on his hips, sweat on his brow, and said, "That's the best legal protest I've ever painted." I didn't reply. I just stared at it, stunned. Somewhere in the middle of all this, the grief, the rules, the rebellion, I had created something beautiful, something my wife would have loved. That night, we planned the unveiling. It wasn't an official event, of course, just a casual gathering. I texted a few neighbors. Clara made flyers that read, "The wall speaks, see what Beige inspired." And by 6 p.m. the next evening, people started showing up. Lawn chairs appeared. Kids brought scooters and sidewalk chalk. The Johnsons brought lemonade. The Rodriguez family grilled mini sliders and set them out on trays. Someone even brought a Bluetooth projector and started looping photos of HOA infractions from the past, photos neighbors had secretly saved over the years. It was like a neighborhood coming out party, and the guest of honor was a 20-foot-tall satire of tyranny. By 7:30 p.m., more than 40 people had gathered on my front lawn. And then, right on cue, Linda arrived. You could hear her before you saw her. The clicking of her heels, the exaggerated sigh, the carefully composed face of someone ready to squash joy with a clipboard. She walked up the driveway like she was storming a castle, eyes scanning the crowd like she was counting offenses. Then she saw it, the mural. She stopped, dead in her tracks. Her mouth fell open slightly, just enough to reveal the crack in her control. Her eyes darted across the wall, taking in every detail. Her throne of citations, Carl's bush cam, Deborah's money spa. You could almost hear her brain tripping over itself, trying to figure out whether to scream, faint, or pull a legal loophole out of her pocket. And then she saw me. I was leaning casually on the porch rail, arms crossed, scout at my feet. I gave her a friendly wave and said, "Linda, good to see you. What do you think?" For a moment, she was silent. Then she stepped forward, like a prosecutor at closing arguments. "This," she said, gesturing at the wall with exaggerated disgust, "is a violation of what?" I cut in, still calm. Section 12A, subsection 5.4.2 only prohibits non-compliant base colors. I used beige number 3. Approved. Documented. She blinked. I saw her jaw tighten. The content, she started again, is protected by city ordinance. I continued. Nothing offensive. Nothing commercial. Just art. Personal expression on private property. No rules broken. Silence. Then Rico stepped forward, lifting his camera. Smile, Linda, he said with a grin. You're the star of the show. That broke the crowd. Laughter erupted, soft at first, then full. Even some of Linda's usual loyalists couldn't help but smirk. Her face turned red, not from embarrassment, but from sheer, impotent rage. She turned on her heel and stormed away, muttering something about taking this to the board. The board that was slowly being won over by the people she'd alienated for years. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the mural glowed in the golden light. I sat on the porch, Scout curled up beside me, and watched the neighbors mingle. People were smiling, chatting, connecting. This wasn't just about pain anymore. It was about taking something back. The right to be different, to grieve, to express, to laugh. And for the first time since my wife passed, this house felt not just like home, but like hope. If there's one thing I've learned about people like Linda Kepler, it's this: they don't lose quietly. She didn't yell that night. She didn't throw a clipboard or tear the mural down in some dramatic meltdown. Though in hindsight, I kind of expected that. No, Linda was far more strategic than that. She left the unveiling in silence, heels tapping furiously against the pavement, lips drawn in a straight line that screamed one thing louder than words ever could. This isn't over. And it wasn't. The very next morning, I found a large white envelope taped to my front door. HOA logo in the corner. My name in aggressive, bold font. No postage. No mailman. Delivered by hand. Inside, a formal notice of review and escalation. Dear Mr. Harris, the mural recently installed on the exterior of your property, while technically painted atop an approved base color, has prompted serious concern among the board of directors. While the handbook does not explicitly prohibit murals, the HOA reserves the right to take action against displays deemed disruptive to community harmony or visual standards. Effective immediately, your case will be presented to the Special Compliance Committee, a closed meeting to determine whether your mural qualifies as a visual nuisance and if removal is necessary to preserve the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. You are required to attend the session on Thursday at 7 p.m. Failure to appear may result in automatic judgment. Sincerely, HOA Compliance Enforcement Committee. Visual nuisance. That was the phrase they landed on. Not illegal, not obscene, just nuisance. The word hit me sideways. My house, a living tribute to the woman I loved, a canvas of neighborhood solidarity, a monument to joy and satire, was being labeled a nuisance. It was like being called too loud at your own memorial. Listen, she said, tapping a finger on the paragraph I already knew by heart. They have no solid ground unless they amend the bylaws and get a neighborhood majority vote. Until then, all they've got is threats. Still, I said, they could vote to fine me. Or worse. They'll try, she said. But you have one thing they don't: public support. She was right. By the time Thursday evening rolled around, the neighborhood had transformed, not just in color but in spirit. People waved more, talked more, laughed more. It felt alive. I showed up to the HOA meeting exactly at 6:59 p.m. The community center was packed. Folding chairs lined every inch of the carpet. Linda sat at the front, her expression like stone, surrounded by the other 3 board members who looked visibly uncomfortable. Probably because they knew the vote wasn't going to go the way she wanted. I took my seat calmly and waited. Linda cleared her throat. We are gathered, she began, to address a matter of serious visual disruption. But before she could continue, hands started going up. Claire stood first. I think the mural's beautiful, and I think it's sad we're even here. Then Jenkins. Linda, I've lived here 20 years. This is the first time our neighborhood has felt like a community. That mural started something good. Then Deborah, the HOA treasurer, usually one of Linda's enforcers, stood up, face tight with embarrassment. I think we may have misjudged the situation. That stunned the room. Carl, the vice president, coughed nervously and looked away. And finally, Linda, who had been gripping her pen like a dagger, stood up and declared, "This is not about art. This is about order. If we let this slide, we lose control of the guidelines that make this neighborhood livable." I stood slowly and faced the room. "No, Linda," I said, voice calm but full of weight. "You're not losing control. You're losing the silence that let you control us. And you don't like what we sound like when we're finally unafraid." The room went still. Even Linda's clipboard seemed to quiet itself. The vote took less than 10 minutes. 2 in favor of removal, 3 opposed. The mural would stay. The day after the vote, I walked out onto my porch with Scout, coffee in hand, and for the first time in months, maybe even years, I didn't feel like I was living under someone else's roof. I felt like I had reclaimed it. The mural, now fully protected and officially sanctioned by a reluctant but defeated HOA, stood like a beacon on the side of my home. It faced the entrance of the neighborhood, boldly and unapologetically. Everyone who drove in would see it. Everyone who walked by would read its story, whether they meant to or not. It was no longer just about Linda, or about rules, or about revenge. It had become something far bigger. It was ours. In the days that followed, something remarkable happened. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves began hosting impromptu sidewalk coffee chats. Kids who used to play in backyards came out front to draw murals of their own in chalk. Clara started an after-school art club. Mr. Jenkins, who hadn't spoken to his next-door neighbor in 5 years due to a rosebush dispute, invited him over for barbecue. And all across the neighborhood, little bursts of color began to bloom. Front doors repainted in bold shades, handmade wind chimes tinkling softly in the breeze, porch chairs in mismatched colors, garden art that once would have earned a citation, now standing proudly in flower beds. The HOA didn't dissolve, but it changed. Slowly, stubbornly, but it changed. Deborah stepped down from a board. Carl, after seeing public opinion shift, quietly recused himself from compliance visits. And as for Linda, she stayed. But her power? That was gone. She still walked the neighborhood, clipboard in hand, but the pages were mostly blank now. She couldn't enforce conformity when the community had chosen color. She couldn't punish expression when it had become celebration. People no longer feared her. They simply smiled and waved. And honestly, that might have been the worst punishment for her of all. One evening, about a month after the vote, I found a small envelope tucked in my mailbox. No stamp, no signature, just one sentence scribbled in delicate handwriting. She would have been proud. Ed, I never asked Linda if she wrote it. And I didn't need to, because this wasn't about winning. It never really was. It was about healing, about expression, about keeping a promise I made when I lost the most important person in my life, about painting a world that had gone gray and reminding it that color still matters. Rico eventually moved on to his next project, a downtown wall he planned to cover in portraits of immigrants and essential workers. But before he left, he handed me a framed print of the mural sketch, signed by every neighbor who had helped, even the kids. It hangs in my hallway now, right next to the seafoam painting Anna made all those years ago. Sometimes I still sit on the porch at sunset, coffee in hand, Scout snoring at my feet. And I look at the mural, the soft beige beneath it, the vibrant color above it, the laughter it sparked, the neighbors it brought together. And I smile, because even in the middle of HOA tyranny, grief, and beige walls, there was still room for something beautiful. And that's the kind of house worth fighting for. Thanks for watching this interesting story. Kindly subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for latest story updates.